And I'm really happy to present our next speaker, Anton Kril, Director of Architecture at Adobe, with a presentation, Evolving Magento Domain Model. Please welcome in presenting him on stage.
Добрий день, всім добрий день. Раз в 2 роки я маю можливість виступати в своїй рідній країні, і мене заставляють англійською говорити. Доведеться, тут пройшли старі добрі часи, коли не було іноземців у нас на конференціях, тепер доводиться. Okay, so I'll switch to English for a bunch of people who would not understand me if I would speak Ukrainian. I'm, as you were told, Director of Architecture at Magento, now Adobe, which means that I send emails and draw diagrams. Normally I don't write code, so you'll have a bunch of diagrams that I drew. And those diagrams are kind of important for us, for me. And I think they're important for evolution of Magento, right? And they describe the evolution of Magento APIs. Magento historically was built, it was a startup, right? It was a small platform, small company built a small platform, and gradually features were added to that platform, but they were added step by step, and the domain model, today we can say freely that a lot of components of Magento are legacy code that evolved gradually step by step without strong upfront design. Do I think that detailed upfront design makes sense for composite systems? No, but at least high-level vision is important. So we'll be talking about this high-level vision of domain model specifically of Magento. Right? Magento 2, that was released 3 years ago, did not change domain model of Magento 1, right? You probably know that. Data structures didn't change, database tables did not change, database storage engines did not change, a lot of things didn't change, and API code didn't change. Like models, all the same models stayed there. Conceptually, what's, in my opinion, one of the biggest differences of Magento 2 from Magento 1 is lowest level framework changes, like dependency injection, interception. Those things changed, right? So we somewhat updated the platform, brought it up to the level of PHP frameworks that year. And then now we are thinking, what do we do with the domain model, right? So this is what I will be talking about. But first, I want to give you an update on how things go for Magento, right? Do you guys, who knows what Gartner Magic Quadrant is? Okay, 3 people, great. So this is kind of important. This is very important. This is super important because it's Gartner Magic Quadrant. Gartner and Forrester are 2 very respected analytical agencies, and every year they publish their reports, and their reports are used by lots and lots of businesses to decide which technologies to choose to implement their software, to the solutions. And they have reports for different platforms, for different types of software, and this is Magic Quadrant for commerce platforms, right? And here you can see, so Magic Quadrant says completeness of vision, ability to execute. So as you can see, you want your software to be in the top right corner, and the more to the top and to the right your platform is, the more successful you are. As you can see, we have upgoing trend the last couple of years. And this last, you will not read that, but this last year, it already says Adobe Magento. And it just connection of Adobe and Magento gave us the growth last year, right? And one other important thing that you probably don't see here, that 2 of the platforms that are on same level completely as Magento are SAP Commerce and Salesforce Commerce, right? You know what are those platforms? Those are multi-billion-dollar companies. Those are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And this small community-driven platform that started 10 years ago here in Kiev now competes with those giants, like world giants. It's great, it's amazing, it's PHP. Enterprise architects used to not know what PHP is, right? Am I right? I'm right, of course. I'm always right, almost. But they didn't know what PHP is, and now this PHP platform competes. And what does it mean? It means bigger clients, more money, more work for all of you, right? So things are going good for Magento. By the way, who knows the price which Adobe paid for Magento 1 year ago? Oh, more than 3 people, good, 9. So the price was, for you to understand how things went for Magento last couple of years, Magento was sold by eBay somewhere around $300 million, right, in end of 2015. In the beginning of 2018, it was purchased by Adobe for $1.67 billion. 300 million to $1.67 billion, right? So it's a huge, huge growth in those 2.5 years, right, of valuation. So Magento is kind of big deal now, right? You should understand that. Now, this is not technical. I'll go to technical next. Okay, so what does it mean for us? We are going up market. We are getting bigger and bigger clients. We serve bigger and bigger enterprises. Our platform is used to model more and more complex domains, right? So we have to account for that, because that's where big money is. Big money for us, big money for you, right? Make sense? Of course it makes sense. Everybody wants to be rich. And at least me. And so we try to adapt for that. Of course, not forgetting about our lower end of the market. But hopefully I'll explain to you how we plan to do that, right? So one of the APIs that we've been evolving was the separation to data access layer, presentation layer, domain model layer, right? So this is conceptually very similar. This looks like a Magento 1 API and early Magento 2 API, APIs for building your module, right? So for your read operations, get requests, you had blocks that rendered templates. They loaded data from models and collections. Those models used resource models to retrieve data. Resource models used database access layer, right? Similarly, for post operations, for controllers, you had a controller, you had model save operation uses resource model save, and that writes data to database using database access. Very simple, standard PHP LAMP stack application for 2007, right? Everybody wrote such applications even before Magento. Every PHP developer wrote at least 5 PHP frameworks in their life, everybody did that. And one of those frameworks survived and was sold to Adobe for $1.67 billion. Okay, so now Magento started to grow and hired a bunch of senior engineers, and some of them like to call themselves architects. And when they're architects, they have to do something because they're paid to do something smart. So what do? They start to change APIs, right? So how did our architects start to change APIs? One thing we did, we added view model, right? Actually, we did 0 code changes for view model concept. We just said, okay, you know, guys, you can use view models to separate blocks from business logic, right? Because in Magento 1, you used to, if you needed to add some method to a block, you needed to inherit from a base block, add a public method to that, and then you had access from template to that public method, right? Okay, good. I get some feedback from you. By the way, feel free to shout something. If I'm bad, tell me that. But better tell me that I'm good. Okay, so we added this. Why we added this? Because we hate inheritance. By now, hopefully, everybody knows that Magento hates inheritance, right? Yes. Yes, everybody knows that? At least, good. If you still don't know that, come to me later. I'll explain you why. But what? I'm serious. So yeah, so we want to allow you to work with Magento without using inheritance. There is still a lot of legacy APIs in Magento that force you to use inheritance, but gradually we remove that need from you. Right? So next thing we said, okay, we're architects, we have to deprecate something. So we've deprecated model load and model save operations, right? So because it's bad to mix business logic with persistence logic in same class. So we said, no, do not call model load and model save, they're deprecated. But of course, so we then looked at this diagram, I think, yeah, it looked kind of empty, right? So we removed something, now we need to add something. So we added different things, right? So we just effectively just renamed things. But we, remember, Adobe Magento continued to pay us for all of this thing. So okay, so we introduced repositories. Why did we introduce repositories and service contracts? Because it was easy to expose them as API endpoints. We wanted to say, okay, same object can be used in memory, in process, and remotely as web API. One of the most terrible ideas in software world, but for Magento, luckily we didn't go too far with that. And we implemented service contracts that are very useful for API isolation, but for now we don't call them remotely for inter-service communication, but we expose them as APIs. So this idea totally works good. We'll talk about it, we'll continue in that direction with slightly different approach. Okay. So now so this is where we were as of Magento 2.2, some like 2.3, our current Luma theme. So you have controllers, you have blocks. Now we say, okay, so we did a lot of changes in backend Magento application. We have to do something with frontend. We stood up, we looked what happens with frontend. I told you that. We figured out that 2 generations of JavaScript developers and frameworks died while we were doing these important changes with resource model. We figured out we need a new front-end framework. So we decided to go with React. First, of course, we wanted to write our own framework, as we always did. But then some front-end developers persuaded us that there is kind of 1 million React developers already there, so probably it will be useful to reuse that pool of people. Right? So we said, now we're building PWA. Right? So we are building PWA application. Magento will be super fast, super convenient to build UIs. Of course, so you can check that Venya PWA demo. Oh, sorry, that's Venya PWA.com, but this should also work if I remember correctly. But next, we say that PWA, so we are building, if you don't know what PWA is, today it will be mentioned many times. Please go read that. You should know that. That's important technology you should know today. Next, of course, your PWA application requires an API to communicate to your server. So we decided, okay, our REST APIs are not built for PWA application. So we need new APIs. So how do we build that new APIs? Which protocol to use? Of course, being Magento PHP developers, our first initial reaction was that we need to build VSDL. We need to build SOAP APIs for PWA. It was supposed to be funny. Okay. But of course we didn't do that. There was a GraphQL API that's convenient for PWA. That's what we're doing. And now we're saying GraphQL has to be performant, and our service contract APIs that are mostly built for admin integration scenarios are not built for performance. They are built for precision and consistency of data. So we say that we need new storefront APIs that will be serving APIs of GraphQL, right? So now, and those storefront APIs implementation already talks to database access layer and talks to the database. Right? But we will not stop here, and we will go further with changing data structures and data models that will be optimized for storefront and storefront performance. Right? And conceptually, if you follow if you look at this diagram, you understand that effectively we're building new storefront, right? And this is our understanding how a storefront should look like. Storefront application in Magento should look, in commerce application, not Magento, in general commerce application should look like. First, it has to be optimized for performance, and it should be self-sufficient, real-time application that serves all customer requests. And it should be able to serve customer requests without, so it has to be self-sufficient. It has to be able to serve customer requests, client requests, without ever depending or touching back-office application. So if your back-office application goes offline, your storefront should be able to completely accept customer registrations, accept orders, and store them, right? And these are some critical components that we think, big, higher-level components that we think should be in this storefront application. An important thing is that this time we want to isolate them. We are building them in an isolated manner so that their boundaries between those components are clearly defined. Now, of course, being commerce application, Magento needs also back-office application, back-office components that will perform important administrative functions. The difference of back-office application, it's not real-time. It must never serve customer requests. And the other important difference of back-office application is that a lot of bigger enterprises already have those systems installed, right? So it means that for an enterprise that already has, for example, Microsoft Dynamics installed with their ERP, CRM, order management solutions, they will not need Magento order management, inventory management, product information, CRM, right? By the way, do you hear me well? Okay, so it has to be replaceable. So the requirement for replaceability of these components is much higher, right? And Igor Minyailo will talk today. He will have more technical presentation. We will tell you more details about how we plan to decouple, how we actually working on this technically today. But I'm conceptually just showing you the very important difference between these components. So one important concept that I'm talking about, one important concept that I'm constantly talking about everywhere, I think, is unidirectional data flow. That's one of the most important principles that I don't think we talk enough. It's a founding principle. It's an important principle for many, many scalable applications and many, many things that you know and work with, like HTTP, MVC, React. They are all conceptual built on unidirectional data flow. So data is modified in one infrastructure and then is read through different infrastructure. Never same infrastructure is used to modify data and retrieve data. Why? Because different infrastructures can only be optimized for different use cases, right? The read infrastructure has different optimizations than write infrastructure. So we want to apply that principle to the design of these components that we have here in Magento. That data should be always unidirectional. So we say we distinguish two systems, storefront systems and back-office systems. Back-office system, let's say product information management. There are standalone product information management systems on the market, like Akineo PIM, right? Our partner, we have a good partnership with them. But their source information, where a merchant edits their product information, right? And their product data is mutable, but then it's aggregated together with inventory information, some pricing information, and propagated to storefront catalog. For storefront catalog, the data is read-only, it's immutable. It's optimized for retrieval, so it's super scalable. Why is it super scalable? Because immutable data is trivial to scale. You just copy it in multiple regions or multiple machines. There is no changes, right? The biggest problem with scalability of applications is for writes, right? Writes are your problem. So you don't want to mix your infrastructures for writes and for reads. So that's why unidirectional data flow. So this is an example of systems where back-office systems are the source of truth, storefront systems are immutable. They are used to give information to merchant. Make sense so far? Did I put you to sleep? No sleep? Okay. Okay, good. So data is, I just wrote down everything I just said here, right? important, never serves customer requests. Back-office systems never serve customer requests. This principle is violated somewhere today in Magento, but conceptually it has been there in Magento since day 3 probably of Magento, where indexing was introduced, where we have source tables and then we have index tables, and we read from index tables on Storefront. But the difference, what we're doing now, we're saying that this is a founding principle of Magento. We separate, we conceptually identify which system is a source system and which system is a published system or aggregated system, right? Different example where Storefront works as a source, the source system, right? Where orders originate from Storefront, and then they propagate it to back-office system. And in order management system, orders are immutable. They come to the system. There should be also separate systems to work with orders in back-office, but this is why this is reversed. Storefront now is a source, and it causes some challenges for scaling Storefront, because now you have to deal with scaling rights, and globally distributing rights. If your merchant store should be global and work in multiple locations. But again, if you separate those systems and you say my system is write and this system is read, it's much easier to scale them than if your system is has two-directional data flows. Right? Another example of where the Storefront is the source and back office is both, is mix, where you have to create customers and read customers. In this case, we say that back office system has to have separate customer editing service component, right? Now, let me go back one slide. So why do we do all of that? I already mentioned a couple times. Scalability, simplicity, evolutionary architecture. Who knows the term evolutionary architecture? There's kind of a book about that. So it's just an architecture that allows you to evolve different components, different elements of your system independently. It's kind of simple term, but hard to achieve. Microservice architecture is one of the examples of evolutionary architectures, right? Nothing super fancy about that. But also one important reason why we want to do that, upgrades. Different components should be will be easier to upgrade when they are more isolated, when they're more clearly defined, and there are more clear boundaries between those components, right? You can even upgrade those components independently. One of big, I think, tools that developers have in migration from Magento 1 to Magento 2, or managing complex installations of Magento, is again microservice architecture. If you have a highly customized store and you replace a lot of Magento behavior with your custom behavior, and you really don't use Magento behavior anymore, just Magento framework, it's time for you to think about extracting that behavior to a separate microservice, right? And that will allow you to write that service in the technologies that you like. Right? It might be PHP, absolutely normal, to like PHP in 2019 and write microservices in it. Not the best technology for microservices, but you could do that. Right? At that point, if it's super customized, you already don't have the benefits of Magento for that subsystem. For example, your subsystem is checkout, your pricing service, or product information management, right? Okay. One important note about all of this, all these things that let me go back to the slide to explain to you better. Important note about this, it's not a project. There is no such project in Magento now that says we go and do all of that one by one. It's a technical vision. It's a document that we have, and it's kind of a constitution by which Magento is moving its data model. It means that every time Magento works on some project that is functional, like a feature, like great example of such project is MSI that was led by Igor Minyailo, who's now our lead architect for Magento Commerce. When we need to add a new feature of multi-source inventory, there is 18 million ways of how we can implement that feature. But we choose the way that will bring us closer to the system. And a great example of implementation in multi-source inventory, the example of this application of this principle that I mentioned of unidirectional data flow, where we separated storefront from back office in place order. One important example, place order operation. Place order operation used to update inventory table, which is terrible from many perspectives, which is bad from many perspectives. Bad from scaling. Updates are very, very bad, very hard to scale. So what did we do? First, from perspective of scalability, we replaced updates with append operations. This is how you normally scale writes. First thing that you want to do if you have writes that you cannot avoid, one thing you want to do is you try to move update operations to append operations, add operations, right? That's how lots of indexes in highly scalable databases work. They use append-only data structures. Right? So what we did, we said, now when you place an order, you don't update inventory, right? What do you do? What do you do? What do we do with multi-source inventory? Who knows? Reservation, great. We introduced append entity, reservation. So now reservation is a storefront system, a storefront component that allowed us to decouple storefront system from back office system and replace updates with append. Right? Now, did we absolutely have to do it for multi-source inventory? No, but we knew that we were rewriting the code, and it makes sense to introduce this thing because we know that we have this principle of separation of components and unidirectional data flow. Now, also, other thing that we did there, we explicitly defined inventory as a set of services that are isolated from other components. So inventory is now standalone component. Magento framework still doesn't allow to completely deploy inventory as a separate service, but if you have your inventory service, it's much easier for you to replace Magento inventory service with your custom one, right? Makes sense so far? Is it super smart? Yes, Anton, it's super smart. I have to, sometimes I have to fake some feedback, good feedback. Okay, so now we talked about how our infrastructure APIs are evolving. We talked about how our domain APIs are evolving or will be evolving. One important aspect, I'll talk about this in a moment. One important aspect that's also happening to our APIs. You might have noticed that we launch more and more SaaS services. Right? We have this problem of upgrades. You probably know that. Magento has a problem of upgrades. Every time we release upgrade, you guys, of course, heavily customize Magento. You use some private classes we ask you not to use, and then you complain that it's hard to upgrade. So what's the approach? One of the approaches to fix that we've chosen. Very simple. Some new features. If we can implement a new feature as SaaS service, we put it to SaaS service. That means that it's much easier for us to upgrade that behavior. We don't have to. We just upgrade. Most probably will not break you. Also, we don't have to for you to upgrade our PHP extension or upgrade to a new version of extension for you to deliver security fixes and and the performance improvement fixes to your clients, right? And of course, it takes all the ability for you to customize Magento, right? Which is great for us because you don't complain about upgrades. You complain about lack of customizability, but you don't complain about upgrades. Here I have an important thing that more such services are coming because that's an important direction for us. We want to offer a more advanced capabilities as SaaS services to Magento customers, to Magento clients. And there's many benefits to having them as SaaS services. They are managed, they are tuned, they're multi-tenant, they're upgradable, they are more secure, they are more performant for your merchants, and normally they offer more functionality, right? This is one important direction. Of course, to evolve this APIs, so our size APIs will be evolving. We already have API Magento.com. to be honest, not all of the services are behind this API gateway yet, but they will be behind that API gateway. Again, the one big API that we are evolving now is SaaS API. And of course, sooner or later, the question of customizability of our SaaS services will raise, right? And I will not share a lot, I will not share anything about that today, but there will be announcements from Magento about how do we plan to do that? How do we plan to put more behavior to SaaS and get and still allow you to customize, do some customizations there. Okay, so I think I'm out of time. I think I told you almost everything that I wanted to tell you. There is a couple topics in my head still. If you want to chat, I'll stick here. Thanks for attention, and that's it. Do we have questions?
Thank you. Yeah, we are now ready to accept some questions, guys. Please raise your hands.
Forgot to do this thing.
Thanks for the presentation. It was really nice, especially the first part.
You didn't like the second one?
Yeah. Actually, I have a question about the whole approach of increasing implementation of new patterns that, for example, CQRS. Martin Fowler says that it's really important to all of people who work with this extremely understand because this, and he said that he had problem when not all people will know about this, and it can cause a problem of not understanding. Do you feel that community accept new approaches and they are ready to have such pay for this?
Yeah, that's a very hard question, yes. And it's a very real problem for us. There is a lot of Magento developers out there. Not all of them are strong, let's say. Right? Some of them are not that strong, and some of them don't know how to write. Never heard thing like CQRS or event sourcing. So our task is to make the system functional out of the box and really flexible for you if you know what you're doing. How to do that? Well, that's very hard. Hopefully, we continue innovating that. So far, we were somewhat successful in that because we managed to build a platform that gathered hundreds of thousands of developers and also are somehow got to top corner of Magic Quadrant together with such giants as Salesforce and complicated systems as Salesforce and SAP Commerce. And again, practically how you do that? Normally you make the system very flexible on lower level and then build APIs more abstraction on higher level. So now that if the developer that knows what he's doing, he can work on lower level APIs. The developer that's not as strong works on higher level APIs. That's a very vague answer to your question, but it'll take a lot of time to completely discuss it and open the topic. We can chat after that. But conceptually, yes, we know that it's a problem. We know that we have to make sure that this separation of concerns does not does not make Magento very complex. I strongly believe that defining boundaries between components makes the system easier to understand because every component is simpler. Right? So you see APIs and know what that component does. Okay, I kind of answered that question.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, thank you for a really interesting lecture. I have a question about the persistence layer, which you talked earlier in the first part. So there is an entity manager for a long time in Magento. Mm-hmm. It's a deprecated, basically, class. I would like to ask when the new persistence manager instead of old entity manager can be released, and which way is better to use for now, to use directly resource models or to use entity manager? I mean, better to use to migrate to new persistence manager. Thank you.
Okay, so as I said in the beginning, my title is architect, which means I send emails and write diagrams. It didn't include writing code. I still do write some code, but I cannot commit to dates, fortunately for me, so nobody can catch me on lies, right? And so I'll not commit to dates. But yes, that is happening. I don't think we will use heavy concepts, heavy ORM concepts. It will be much lighter than normal ORMs, but also customizable. There is a lot of things happening right now. When it will be released, and some of them you can follow in some of our branches like GraphQL. But as I mentioned, Storefront data access layer will be different from very often back office components data access layers. Different, but also similar. Just we'll have higher level APIs and lower level APIs that will be very different for data access. And also, it also means that very often Storefront data storage engines will be different from back office data storage engines.
Just to add 2 cents to the...
No, Igor, it's time for questions, so let's do...
No. I just wanted to say
he
that...
He just does it all the time.
I just wanted to say
30
that...
30 seconds. 29. 28.
That question is going to be in particularly covered on a presentation by Andrei Konosov, who is core architect of Magento and who is sitting just nearby me, regarding the new database access layer. So you may attend his presentation a little bit later today, and he'll describe that in detail. Thank you.
Okay, then that's available. I forgot to mention. So Igor Minialo, this guy that just talked, will give you more technical details about technical direction for how to decouple components. Eugene Santiago will give you a presentation about a proposal, one of the examples of thinking, of design about this new APIs that we are defining for GraphQL and Storefront APIs. That we don't know when we will implement, but we have to think about long-term vision for them. So Eugene Santiago will show a presentation about checkout, and Konosov will talk about the lower-level details on persistence. Okay. Any more questions?
Hi. Yes, thank you for your speech, and just it's very informative, and it presents really important stuff for us. It's like the way Magento will think and will be built. Yeah. But maybe it's not a question, but a request. You announced this feature like a major change, and yeah. It will be super nice if you will pay attention for the backwards and compatibility and maybe graceful degradation, because it's very important maybe for the community and engineers to have ability to transfer their old implementations to the new way. So please, if you will announce later as possible, because it's very important.
Okay, good point. Yeah. So as if you follow how Magento does things with PWA, GraphQL, and the separation of services, we do not change current implementation. So that implementation is not, you can stay on current implementation of Storefront as long as you will probably, we don't even talk about deprecating or removing those current APIs. All this, as I showed on my diagram, I showed we're talking about Storefront, and we were moving from top, from PWA, GraphQL, and down, right? So we're building that on the side, next to Magento current Storefront, right? So it means, well, you need to do a migration if you decide to use PWA and GraphQL and customer. Yes, you will need to do that, but somehow that's our world. Technologies change, you have to jump from technology to, but that also means that the current implementation of Storefront does not change, and it's not a breaking change for those who stay there. That implementation is current now, it will stay there for a long time, right? And so I think that's the best way for us to do such changes. Can we stop doing? Can we not do? Can we not think about this direction? I don't think we cannot do that. We have to change. We have to, the same as changing Storefront implementation. Front-end framework. We have to do that. We have to do that because we will be very, very outdated. Everybody will hate that, right? Now, how to do that? How to evolve the system? Well, we have to think. The best way, so far, I think we've chosen the best way for you is that we build this new storefront. So back office system will stay the same for very, very long time. Storefront is built with a lot of this and the ideas in mind. Okay. Good. Any more? Yes, there's a couple more. Do we have time?
Unfortunately, we don't have time for the questions, but please feel free to find Anton during the coffee break and discuss it afterwards. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for attention. See you around.
Yeah, thank you.